So, what happens when the thing that once made you successful or admired or attractive or relevant begins to fade? Most of us spend years building an identity around our strengths and our accomplishments and the roles we play. But eventually, life asks a question that can be both unsettling and transformative. Who are you when the applause gets quieter? So, today I want to explore that question through an unexpected lens. A conversation about Madonna and aging and what it means to keep evolving. Because beneath the headlines and public opinions lies a challenge that every one of us will face at some point. How do we discover the next song we're meant to sing when the one that defined us is no longer enough? So, welcome back to Women on the Brink. Today, I want to explore a question that kind of emerged from a social media post that made me take a second look. And the post really wasn't, just about Madonna, at least not entirely. It was more about aging and identity. It was about, what happens when the thing that once made us powerful or attractive or successful or relevant begins to change. And maybe more importantly, it was about a simple but profound question. What's the next song of our lives? Not the song that's playing now on the radio or the song that made us famous or the song everyone remembers us for, but the song that we're supposed to be singing now. And that question doesn't belong to just Madonna. It belongs to all of us. So for more than 4 decades, Madonna represented disruption. Wouldn't you agree? She challenged cultural norms around sexuality and gender and religion, fame, self-expression. And, whether you loved her or hated her, she has forced some conversations. And she was provocative, not simply for the sake of shock, but because she understood that culture can change when someone is willing to push against its boundaries. And you know what? Many people admire that courage. I certainly understand why. But as Madonna continues to perform and present herself in ways that are reminiscent of the themes of her younger years, some people find themselves asking a different question. So, not so much should she act her age? That's kind of I don't know, that's a shallow question. The deeper question is, has the rebellion evolved? Has the message she's trying to get out there matured? Has the expression transformed into something new? Because most of us hope that growth looks like evolution. We hope our understanding deepens, we hope our priorities shift, and we hope we become more ourselves rather than simply becoming louder versions of who we've always been. And, this doesn't mean abandoning passion, and it doesn't mean being boring or, giving up our vitality. It means integrating wisdom. So, Madonna, she really occupies a very unique and special place in our culture. She challenges assumptions about what older women are supposed to be. And let's be honest. I mean, there's lots of people that still carry unconscious expectations like those. They expect older women to become softer or quieter, less visible, less sexual, less powerful. So when someone refuses to follow that script, it can provoke some discomfort. And sometimes that discomfort is, genuine concern, but sometimes it's insecurity or projection. And sometimes it's ageism disguised as criticism. The reality is that Madonna forces people to confront their own beliefs about aging. And maybe that's why reactions to her are often, super intense. She's not simply a celebrity, she's actually a mirror for us. We look at her and we see our fears and judgments and hopes even, and maybe even the unresolved question about growing older. So what makes this conversation especially interesting is the comparison many people have drawn between Madonna and Pamela Anderson. So for decades as well, Pamela Anderson embodied a highly stylized version of femininity. She became one of the most recognizable symbols of glamour and sex appeal in modern culture. But in recent years, her public image has shifted dramatically. Less makeup, less performance, not so much emphasis on maintaining a particular fantasy, more emphasis on being authentic and simplistic, more emphasis on presence. And people often describe this transformation as refreshing. And not because her beauty disappeared, but because something else came forth, something else emerged. You can see in Pamela that there's a lot more of a sense of ease and a peace. There's a sense that she no longer needs to prove as much. And that distinction is what matters. So the conversation isn't really about whether someone should wear makeup, dress provocatively or embrace sexuality. The conversation is about whether our choices feel rooted in freedom or in the need for validation. And those are two very different things. And from the outside, it can sometimes be hard to know which is which. But what really strikes me most about this discussion is how universal it is, because almost everyone wrestles with relevance. Athletes, actors, entrepreneurs, parents experience it. Everyday, ordinary people experience it. And there comes a moment when, the strategies that we all once used no longer produce the same results. So the room changes, the audience changes, the culture changes, and eventually we face difficult questions. Am I trying to become who I am next? Or am I trying to remain who I once was? And that question can be terrifying because identities become really comfortable. And success and recognition becomes addictive, and letting go of an old version of ourselves can kind of feel like a death. Yet growth requires that very thing, as we know. So one way to think about aging is through the lens of expansion. When we're young, we're often building. We get our careers going, we build relationships, status, reputation, identity. But eventually, life invites us into a different stage. And this stage is less focused on acquisition and more focused on contribution, less focused on being seen and more focused on helping other people see, less focused on proving and more focused on serving. And that doesn't mean becoming, invisible. It just means we become a little bit deeper. And I mean, let's face it, the most compelling elders aren't necessarily the ones who have the most energy. They're often the ones that with the most perspective because they've transformed experience into that wisdom, and pain into compassion, and success into mentorship, and knowledge into guidance. And that transformation creates a different kind of power. It's much more quiet, but it's also usually a more lasting one. So I guess what moved me most about the original reflection was its compassion. It wasn't a criticism about Madonna, it wasn't an attack. It was just an acknowledgement that every human being eventually confronts the same challenge. What is the next song? And as mentioned, the athlete asks it, the CEO, the artist, the parent, the retiree. And if we're fortunate enough to grow older, we ask it too. What happens when the role we've mastered no longer defines us? And what happens when the applause dies out? And what happens when our youth leaves the room? I mean, what remains? And I think this is the real question beneath all discussions about aging. Not whether we're still attractive or relevant, not whether we're still cool, but whether we're still growing, whether we're still becoming, and whether we're still discovering new dimensions of ourselves. Because, like Madonna, life isn't asking us to replay our greatest hits forever. Life is just asking us to write another verse, and then another, and then another. So in closing today, maybe the goal isn't to stay young. Maybe the goal is to stay alive, spiritually, emotionally, creatively, and to keep evolving and learning and becoming. Madonna's journey's her own. Pamela Anderson's journey's her own. Your journey's your own. Mine is mine. But all of us, in one way or another, are searching for the next song. And maybe wisdom isn't found when we finally discover the answer, that maybe wisdom is found when we're willing to keep listening for it. Thanks for listening today, you guys. And until next time, just keep questioning, keep listening for the music that's trying to come forth in this next chapter of your life.